Hello, everyone. I think we are already online. My name is Nadia Mamet. I'm a co-founder of Manatex startup company. If you join us for the first time, then welcome to our webinar. If it's not the first time, still welcome back to our educational events. So you probably noticed that we haven't organized our webinar since some time. So the last one was a webinar about open innovation with Nikola Tosic, and this time we have another interesting topic. So we haven't organized this since some time for a reason. So our team is very, very busy at this moment working on our expert performance management solution based on AI technology and our own scoring model that we created. So we plan to launch this platform for public, for SMEs at the beginning of 2025, but you can already now find some form on our website and fill it in and wait for the testing account, for example. So just a brief introduction. If you don't know anything about Manatex, Manatex was created to support small and medium-sized enterprises on their global journey. So we created our platform, trainings, webinars. So we are basically working as a knowledge management center for small and medium-sized companies. Because we believe this is our mission to support this kind of firms when they struggle with some decision making, return on investment, and etc. etc. So today we are back to our webinars, and we decided to organize a number of webinars about different countries. And our friend Alex today will talk about very interesting market, the country which is not really known, I would say, on the one hand. On the other hand, it's a country that probably everybody wants to visit. The country which is can be probably named as a gateway to many other important markets, like markets of Southeast Asia. Country where the disposable income of people is quite high and social situation is very positive. So the market is actually very attractive, but not many people, not many companies actually target this market because they still believe that the market is very complicated and difficult to crack. So our friend Alex Banyeres, a senior consultant, will talk today about Australia. So Australia is not an easy market to penetrate, but again, so very attractive and interesting country. So Alex, thank you so much for participation. Thank you so much for your time, and please tell us what you prepared. So I'm sure it's going to be fascinating. I have seen the presentation. There are a lot of case studies. There is a lot of practical information, and I'm sure that this recording, this information will be supportive for so many companies that want to know more about Australia.
Okay. Beautiful. Thank you very much, Nadia. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about Australia and to share my experience and my knowledge about the market. I think Manatex and our experience is also realigned. We focus on small and medium enterprises, and Australia is a big market for a lot of European companies that can grow the market there. As you mentioned, it's not a natural market for most of the European companies. However, we do believe that it's a beautiful trampoline, a great sandbox, and a very positive hedge for other markets. So without any further introduction, I'll jump straight into some key information about the market and how and how the macroeconomics of the country can be very helpful for our growth there. So first of all, I'm pretty sure almost everyone has seen a postcard of comparing Australia and an overlap of Europe. Australia is 7.7 million square kilometers, and Europe it's 10.18. So Australia is almost there. The big difference, of course, is that Europe it's full of different countries, languages, and a huge population. Where Australia, the biggest island, that it's only a continent and it's a country, and it's only 26 million people. Having said that, the population keeps growing. When I got into Australia in 2003, I believe we were only 21. So this keeps growing. Another key element or key characteristic of the Australian market is that more than half of the population is in the 5 big cities that probably everyone has heard of. So Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, and Perth. So I won't go into a geographic class here, but there's 5 states and two territories. The other big difference between Australia and other countries, and even what a lot of people might perceive about Australia, is that Australia is no longer, should I say, an Anglo-Saxon country. 33% of the people that live in Australia were born overseas, such as myself, and 50% of the people have one of the parents were born overseas, like my kids. So a lot of people speak different languages back at home. There's a huge background, mainly with Europe. Probably everyone can understand that it's a big influence of Greece, Italy, Poland, Germany up to a point. You might have heard by now that I'm Spanish. There's also a Spanish community, and obviously at the beginning of the century, the migration changed to Southeast Asia Pacific countries, China, and a lot of South Americans too. So we were talking about geography. So those are the states. The big cities are to the right of the map. So Brisbane, which is 2.3 million people. Then we go south. Sydney, which is the biggest city, 5.3. Canberra, even though it's the capital of the country, it's only 300,000 people. Then we go south, and we have Melbourne, which is the second biggest city in the country with 5 million people. Tasmania, Hobart, Adelaide, it's another big city. And then Western Australia, Perth. Western Australia, there's only one big city. Western Australia, even though mining is a huge industry in all the country, most of the biggest mines in the continent are in Western Australia. Some more economic data here. So the working population right now is close to 50 million people. Unemployment is 3.7, so very, very low. Even youth unemployment is 8.30, which is also very low. Australia is the 30th biggest market with a GDP of 1,700 trillion US dollars. As Nadia was mentioning very rightly at the very beginning of the presentation, middle class is big. There's a huge and disposable income. GDP per head is 62,000 US dollars, not Aussie dollars. Debt is pretty low. Interest rate right now it's 4.35. Conversations between banks, financial experts keep delaying bringing down the interest rates in Australia against the trend in other markets. New Zealand has been dropping the interest rate already, but in Australia, a couple of months ago, everyone was expecting interest rates to drop around February. Now the conversation is May. Inflation is pretty big, and it's becoming an issue, a cultural issue or a social issue in the country. Lots of conversation about inflation, cost of living, cost of housing. That has changed a little bit in the last year, to be brutally honest. It's something that in the street you can see the change. The graph to your right is the growth in Australia. And as you can see, growth has always been very positive, with only a couple of hiccups with COVID and so on, like the rest of the world. So if we move on, now we're gonna see two huge tables of what Australia exports and imports. But basically, anybody that has studied a little bit of international trade or even international relations, you can see that Australia, what they export the most is all the minerals from iron ore and oil to also all the new minerals as for batteries and so on. And funny enough, what we also import the most is refined petroleum, then also a lot of cars. And that's also probably a good example of what's happening in Australia and why there's even more of an open door to international trade in Australia. In the 5 years ago, both US car manufacturing multinationals, so Ford and General Motors, had factories in Australia. Right now, none of them do. Toyota and any of the Japanese cars do not produce any cars here. So now every single car that comes to Australia, it's manufactured overseas. We are more worried about small and medium enterprises, but I think that's a good example of how the Australian market is changing and how economies of scale in other countries are also influencing what the Australian economy looks like in the near future. So this is a couple of very visual pieces of information to see the evolution of Australia as an international trade body. So to the left, you have a map of the world, and as you can see, light colors are where the economy or the international trade is growing the most. So obviously, almost all the world, and the two countries where Australia is exporting the most is China and the US, and we'll see later on why. Then to the right, you have a very clear illustration of what are the main trading partners for the Australian companies. So obviously, China, not only we import a lot from China, but we export, and not only we export raw materials, minerals, but you probably read in the news that a couple of years ago, the relationships between China and Australia got a little bit bumpy, I guess you could say. And Australian wine, Australian seafood, they had to suffer huge tariffs, and therefore trade stopped. Right now, those tariffs have been lifted, so Chinese the Chinese consumers can enjoy Australian wine again. But anyway, so China is the biggest trading partner in that part of the world. Then, or in any part of the world, then you have South Korea, you have Japan, you have Thailand. So all the neighbors, even though you almost don't see it there, there's always a very close relationship between Australia and Indonesia, and there's a big demand there. Then we go to Europe, and obviously, I suppose this profile for Nadia, that is an expert, and anybody else could see that the usual European exporting countries are also the ones that are most powerful in Australia. So Germany, Italy, France, and then you have the United Kingdom, even though Brexit and everything else obviously didn't change that much the relationship. And then you have the Italy, Spain, Switzerland, Holland, the whole Benelux and so on. And then you have United States and the rest of the world. We'll see later on how also that reflects on the free trade agreements. So on the one hand, you have the ASEAN trade agreement. So the list is there, but every single country in the region has a free trade agreement with China. Then we have the TPP 11, which again are the Trans-Pacific region, and you have some of the countries overlap, and then you have bilateral agreements. So obviously New Zealand, Singapore, but then the USA, Thailand, Chile, Malaysia, South Korea, Japan, China, Peru, Indonesia, India, and United Kingdom. For all of us, or probably most of us that are in the call today, Europe is not there. And without being an expert, I'm going to dive too much into the detail. The main limitation for Europe and Australia to have a free trade agreement are the agricultural sectors in both regions. both parties are very concerned with the competition that the other agricultural partner could bring in, and that has been probably the most challenging point to sign a free trade agreement. We'll see a little bit later on some very specific cases, but even now you can see that if Europe and Australia don't have a free trade agreement, and a lot of other countries have, that also brings a couple of challenges. It's not only the distance, it's also that anything manufactured in China can get into Australia with no tariff and after 2 to 3 weeks of sea freight, whereas from Europe it will take a little bit longer. Having said that, all the European companies are growing in this part of the world, and we'll start seeing some examples very soon. So the first one is
okay. Just wait a second. So very interesting. So
should I go back?
Just start. No. So it's okay. So thanks a lot. Just before you start talking about different cases, just can you just, because I have had only one case, only one actually project with a company based in Australia, in Poland. So not vice versa. So can you just, because our audience, probably people who will see it later on also, these are mostly European SMEs, North African SMEs, Middle Eastern, and a lot of them are producers of consumer goods also.
Yep.
So, and some tech and so on. Can you just briefly, from your experience, because you've been doing this for like almost 20 years, I think. So what are like the most successful projects or the most successful industries that you could see like thriving in Australia? So yeah.
Yes, it's going to depend a lot on each, I guess, exporting country. Like obviously, because the Greek and the Italian population in Australia is so big and the influence is so strong, Greeks and Italians have almost monopolized some of the foods and fast-moving consumer goods, so fashion, but also olive oil, wine, clothes, and so on. They are very strong. German companies tend to be more in the engineering and industrial space, the B2B industrial space, and you'll have a lot of different examples. Then from technology to furniture to finance. It's the other end of the street, we could say, but Deutsche Bank is here, ABN AMRO, the Dutch company, is here. So there's a lot of financial institutions here. The Spanish example has been mainly renewable and infrastructure, and together with the French and the Italians, army and navy, so military products. It's going to depend on each region. You were mentioning North Africa, so again, we will have a very, I guess, for lack of a better word, an ethnic influence in the foods and drinks that they're exporting. And then you'll have clothes, and then you'll have, and that's probably the best examples. The 3 stories that I'm going to share later on are very common to a lot of businesses from a lot of different European countries. Australia, something that I should have probably made it very clear in one slide, is that even though almost anybody has heard the no worries made, and anybody identifies Australia with a very relaxed society and a very relaxed attitude. First of all, Australians work really hard, and in the cities, they're very used to 10 and 12-hour days. And second of all, there are very strict rules with a lot of things. And in all this, for example, with foods, it's a known fact that labeling requirements for the Australian market are much demanding than Europeans' requirements for foods. So where in Europe, you can list the name of ingredients that a product has, and that's about it. Australia is going to require that you almost have the percentage of each individual ingredient. Australia is going to be very demanding with, Australia is going to be very demanding with labeling, as in who's the exporter, who's the importer, any warnings. Culturally, everyone is very realistic, so you don't have to produce a specific label for the Australian market. So a lot of the companies that we were mentioning before, they can just stick a sticker, black and white, with the key information, and that's not a big limitation in the demand of the product. Obviously, the front side of the product should have everything in English. That's true. But Australians, for example, with work health and safety, they are very, very demanding. With all the compliance, they're very demanding. We'll talk a little bit more about that in those three cases. Going back to your question, I think yes, in general, food, drinks, fashion, and in some countries, everything in the industrial, renewable infrastructure. So usually most of the trains are not the same way as in Europe at all. They are still very old school trains, but metro, underground, light rail is usually the French, the Spaniards, and the Italians that are competing for those contracts. Same way with Navy, Army, and weapons. Probably a lot of people read that 2 years ago, the Australian government changed in the 11th hour a contract that had to purchase French submarines when they signed an agreement with the UK and the US. But those are the sort of markets where European companies and North African companies are very strong.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's about it. I think if we
very interesting observation, so many insights.
Yeah, I think it's also. I was also trying to get quickly into the case studies, and then if there's any questions, because I think it's such a wide range of products and services that anybody can bring into Australia that it's hard to put an umbrella and then to cover everything. But I think one of the things that I was going to touch a little bit later is that Australian is such a demanding market that most of the companies that have an experience in Australia, and I'm almost jumping ahead of the conclusions, a lot of the companies that learn how to deal with the Australian market can take those lessons, and almost any other market in the world will be easy to deal with compared with Australia, which is usually a shock for most companies that come here with no help, no assistance, and no experience. It's like they were not expecting that. So thank you very much for stopping me and giving me the invitation to cover those points. Let me go to the first example, for example. So in Spanish, Tegasa, in English, I don't know what people would pronounce it, but anyway, they've been present in Australia for the last 30 years. What happens in that 2016, they started a lithium-ion battery line company here in Australia. So they had different agreements with different companies, and as many other international trade businesses, they went to a trade fair in 2019, and they were already present with different partners that they were working together with. So in 2021, because of COVID, everything changes. And in 2022, they got an agreement with a local company, which is almost international business best practice 101, right? Working with a local partner where the Spanish company, again, has all the know-how, but the local partner has all the contacts, and they also have a local brand where they can integrate the Spanish product and grow that market, taking advantage of the huge experience that the manufacturing business has back home and all the contacts and the knowledge of the local requirements in Australia. I think the couple of lessons from that company, and that example is that, first of all, take it easy, work with different partners, go to a couple of trade fairs, understand the market, see what the biggest potential is, but then commit to something and have feet on the ground. Probably not only a local partner, but a local person that works for the company, and it's almost the connection between the local partner and the overseas manufacturer. There's a couple of advantages there, and with almost any European company, the same is going to be true. Which, even though it might sound a little bit simplistic, time differences take a role with any business with Australia. Right now, Australia is 10 hours ahead of Europe, so it's almost impossible to align the stars to have a meeting between both parties unless one of them sacrifices the early morning or the late afternoon. When you have a local person, it's much easier to have meetings throughout the day. And as we know, it's all about tailoring the services to the local business. So it's very important to have a local person, a local partner that knows the knowledge, knows the company, can understand the differences, but it's also can also work as an ambassador. The second company that I wanted to talk to you about is give me 1 second, is the Citron Group in Australia. This company has grown exponentially, and when you talk with the senior management, there's a very clear before and after dealing or working with Australia. So to give you a little bit of background, Citron, it's a company that used to do all the fans, all the air conditioning for mines and tunnels back in Europe. They were only exporting to 2 countries, and a local Australian engineering business in Perth were interested in the business. One very junior executive in the company back in Spain started answering all the emails that came from the Australian potential partner. They started talking, they started working together, and after several years, they decided that that person should come to Australia. When that person got into Australia, Citron was mainly a domestic business with presence in 2 other markets. By the time this person left Australia 10 years ago, after 10 years, Citron is present in, I believe, 40 countries. In Australia, they have a manufacturing facility, they have 2 warehouses, they have an office in Sydney, they will open up an office in Melbourne, and they have 60 employees. Now, the key thing here, and that's what I was trying to mention before, is when they got into the Australian market with this partner, they knew their stuff. They didn't understand the Australian market. After a year, a couple of things happened. Because they had somebody on the ground, they decided that that partner was not the best partner for the Australian market, and they decided to go by themselves with this local person. That was the first call that they did after 5 years of looking at the market. The second call that they did is they had a service. They saw an opportunity in a related market, and they took I wouldn't say a gamble, but they invested a lot of money in having the stock to cater to that market where they were growing the other business. And the main lesson for them at the very beginning was the level of requirements and demands from a compliance and work health and safety point of view for any single project. To the point where, as I mentioned before, right now Citron is in 40 businesses. They're in countries. They're in the US, they're in Canada, all over Europe, South Africa, South America, Asia, and every single time, what they're doing is they're using the resources and the lessons from Australia to adapt to the other markets. That's why at the very beginning of the presentation, I was talking about Australia not being only a big opportunity because of what Nadia very clearly explained, which is that the middle class is quite big and quite strong with a very good knowledge of what good products are or what value is. But Australia is also a great educational opportunity for businesses to get to that level. For Citron, Australia wasn't only an opportunity to grow the Australian market or other markets, but at the beginning when they started, the first project that they were involved in, it wasn't even in Australia. It was, I believe it was Ghana in Africa. But what happened is that the mine in Ghana, Africa needed help, and the Australian head office said, look, we haven't worked with these people yet, but everything that they say makes sense, use them. So again, Australia was a trampoline, because even though they were trying to export to Australia, the first opportunity came somewhere else. So for them, the lessons that they could summarize for you about Australia is, first of all, go all in at every level, both professional and personally. So this person that came to Australia, the first 2 years, even though he was married and with a young family, they were in Australia by themselves and by himself, traveling probably 200 days every year, going to every single mine and spending a lot of time with Australian companies, being almost a unpaid consultant for those projects. Then control the whole operation. At the beginning, it can be only one person, but that can grow. Then take risks, as in inventory and hiring people. The first year, it was this person by himself. And then the next couple of years, they already had the team started growing with local talent. With Australia, as in every other business country, probably every consultant will say the same: be patient, commit, but be patient, be flexible, and be very humble. You don't know what that market knows or doesn't know. And then yes, learn from Australia or learn from any other market and grow internationally. Funny enough, when I talk with the right hand of the CEO about this presentation and what I wanted to share about the story, what we also did is we created an internal document for them to share with every single new employee to see how Australia had changed the business. So that's I think that's probably the best case study that we have about Australia.
That's actually very interesting. So the thing that you just mentioned, because we know it, both from academia, actually also research that is done, that companies that start selling abroad actually can learn on the way and improve. And we know also it from our experience, so that is also the reason so why we serve this mission, and because we believe that this kind of learnings can really change the company even on the local market, even so yes. That's actually a great case. And
yeah, I think you're completely right. I think it's all about sharing the knowledge, even as we're doing today, right? You and me with everyone else. I think that's what some people that might see Australia not as a natural market might want to consider Australia for I say you could say added value lessons, right? So the experience and everything else. And so let me go over the next one, because even though Insteam it's already a big multinational, it's not the same case where they started in Australia, and Australia was almost like the tipping point. Insteam was already in the US and was already in Germany and in China by the time they got to Australia. But again, even though they're in the renewable space, Australia for them has also been an amazing experience, because Australia is the only market in the whole planet that they demand that if you are going to connect renewable energy power plant to the grid, you have to spend a year doing all sort of case studies. What happens if energy drops? What happens if there's no sun in 2 months? What happens if there's no wind? I'm not an engineer, so I'm not an expert, but any strange phenomena that could affect electricity and power supply to the cities, it has to be documented and forecasted in these in these projects. And the grid in Australia is because of the geography, the grid is at some points is very linear, so they have to make sure that everything works. And again, for this company, Australia was a great opportunity to work on all these case studies. And now that there is in the industry, these conversations about Brazil demanding similar requirements and some states demanding similar requirements. Australia, the Australian experience, it's a very good guarantee for the company to know that they can match the other examples. Again, with InSteam, even though it was a multinational, what they did in 2013 when they got here is they sent one expat. That one expat came here I think after 12 months, they were already hiring people. And right now, most of the organization is Australian. The expat is, I would say, not even an expat anymore. He's Australian citizen and he's staying in Australia forever, like many other people that come to this country. The other element that this person shared with me, and is not documented, is not research, but from an engineering point of view, it was a very clear, in his view, there's a very clear connection between the huge work, health, and safety requirements in the Australian market and the nature of the country. Because of the huge distances, no mine, no industry can risk being losing headcount because of accidents. So they really make sure that everything is 100% safe, or as 100% as it can be, to avoid accidents that can interrupt the production of anything, of a mine, of a train, of a power plant, of anything, because distances and the nature of some jobs are so complicated that you want to make sure of all of that. So again, this person, when we were having the conversation, was like completely agree with the other experiences. Australia is very demanding with projects. Australia is very demanding with the bidding and with all the documentation, the compliance, work, health, and safety. So that was another case that underscored those characteristics. And for me, I just wanted to go over all of that. And before we say, how do I do this? Let's go back. And go back here. Beautiful. So that's why I was thinking that Australia is your trampoline, because once you're in Australia, you can tackle not only the Australian market that by itself, a lot of these small or medium businesses companies, they reach multi-million euro or volumes within 5-6 years, working hard, obviously, but it's not a small market. But it's also a trampoline to the region. It's a trampoline to those industries. It's a sandbox, and a lot of businesses try new stuff in Australia because it's a very competitive market. So it's a good, tough market to crack. But at the same time, it's pretty isolated. So if anything doesn't completely work, it doesn't risk the overall perception. For example, in Europe, I guess what you could say is, if a chocolate brand from Spain changes a brand, it's a little bit of it didn't really work. Everyone in France is going to know about it, also because of the nature of the supermarkets in Europe. But if you do it in Australia, a lot of people are not going to hear about it. And with technology and mobile apps, it's a given that a lot of people do that. And obviously, it's a hedge because, again, where I'm stronger is with Spanish businesses. Most Spanish businesses are going to export to Portugal, France, Italy, Germany, Benelux, the UK. Well, almost all those countries have the same currency. Almost all those countries have the same strong industries. It's usually the case that if Germany goes one way economically, the rest of the European Union is going to go the same way, whereas Australia is completely independent. Australia is going to be a lot more affected by the US and China than by Europe. So that's why we mean by hedge. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. Nadia, probably have missed a couple of points that are like, oh my gosh, you didn't mention, or tell me about this, or tell me about that. So please feel free to ask anything, or maybe somebody in the audience can ask anything. And yeah.
You know, I probably mention it almost every time that, we do this webinars for a reason. I also recommend them, after all, to my students, for example. And every time I mention, like, oh, yeah, I learned a lot. But today I literally learned a lot because what I love about international business is that you can always learn something new. So, new culture, new language, new industry, a new market, and so on. And today, so it's like 40 minutes ago we started, I learned a lot. I didn't know, honestly, that this market is, I've heard things like it's very complicated, it's hard to crack, it's hard to get in. So, but I didn't know why. So, and now, so I know more about this. So it's a
I
lot of
think
like
on
really
the other side of the
interesting
coin, and just trigger a thought. On the other side of the coin, yes, Australia is pretty tough to crack, but at the same time, the Australian people and the Australian professionals are very open to new stuff and are very straightforward and usually very willing to help. What I mean by that is that almost every company that I mentioned today that came to Australia 10 years ago, their English wasn't the best. They were all Spanish speakers or French speakers. Their English wasn't the best. They came knowing the industry, but they didn't know the Australian market. And they were all very grateful for the Australian professionals that said, check this out, check that out, go to this website. Something amazing about Australia, at least when I compare with other markets that I know pretty well, is that there's a lot of public information from the government online. So if you don't want to go through a local partner that knows a lot more, a lot of people can do a lot of research by themselves and start looking at that. When you mentioned students, I did a much more informal presentation with students in a law and international relations university here in Madrid a week ago. And it was interesting to hear 22-year-olds, 23-year-old Spaniards studying law and international relations that they didn't know a lot about Australia either. And they're very keen to learn about it. And they ask anything from how long the flight takes or how much it is to opportunities. And what was very clear from the very beginning is that, and obviously I only know a couple of European countries very well, but salaries in Australia tend to be higher than in most countries in Europe. The progression for professionals tends to be much clearer, as in you start as a junior, but you can grow, and in 3 years' time, you'll be at another level, and then in another level. And then part of the secret of Australia is that if you're a white-collar professional that did university, or as they say, uni, and you're a lawyer, engineer, and so on, you can make a good living. But Australia has a huge middle class also because a lot of the technical jobs, what they call the tradies, so electricians are called sparkies, but your plumbers, your electricians, everyone, they can also make a good living. And that's part of the secret why Australia as a whole, the middle class, and you can see it when you see the GDP per head and when you see the low salary. Australia might only be 26 million people, but most of that people have an income that enables them to buy stuff that it's good and might be, doesn't have to be, a little bit more expensive than the local option, but it's much better. I mean, obviously some markets are tougher than others. Wine is it's complicated because the Australian wine, it's very good, and as any expert will say, Australians export so much wine that is usually the fourth or fifth country exporting wine, and then France, Italy, Spain are the first three ones. But yeah, I think for young people, Australia is a great country. Have a beautiful experience.
Students, guys, you hear it, so just listen to it. An experienced person. So Australia is a great place to be. So especially if you are young,
it is very
started.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as I said, from our point of view, we usually ask companies that are interested in Australia in how many countries they're exporting. Usually, if a company has been only exporting, as I was mentioning before, they are either in Portugal, Spain, or France, and they export to the other 3 countries. There's probably a learning curve that it's better to go through before getting to Australia. But having said that, if there's a very clear opportunity in Australia, it can be that tipping point, that trampoline that says, okay, yeah, now I'm in Australia, now I can be all over Asia Pacific. It's very easy, and you know it very well because you also know a couple of the people that I talk to. It's very easy to make connections in Australia to operate in Korea or in Japan or in all the region or in the US. So yeah, great opportunity.
Yeah, so probably I think if I would be an expert manager, I would probably like consider it like saying, okay, so they speak English, so it's already easy. So which is completely wrong, as I understand. So you also work a lot with Latin America. So how would you like compare these complexities?
Oh,
so it's a totally different story.
I would say completely different. Even though a lot of people might not expect it, Australia and Latin America are very close for 2 key reasons that are 2 of the key industries. Mining, obviously. There's a lot of Australian interest in mining in South America, and there's a lot of supply companies in South America trying to operate in the Australian market. The second one, it's again all the international students. So traditionally, the 3rd biggest export for Australia is international education. To give you an example, there's 10,000 new Colombian students every year in Australia. There's like 4,000 Chileans, there's 2,000 Mexican, 2,000 Mexicans and 2,000 Argentinians. Australians like to travel a lot. They like to do the gap years. They go a lot to South America. There's a lot of, from a migration point of view, there's a lot of the old generation of Chileans, mainly Chileans and Brazilians that came to Australia, and then there's the new generations. So again, food, drinks, clothes are again where most opportunities are between those 2 continents. I guess the main differences with Australia and South America is that South America, it's rough figure, 20 countries, 20 currencies, 2 languages, but a lot of different accents, a lot of different working best practices or habits. I think, again, a little bit the same for Australia. Most Australian companies, when they want to look into the international business, unless they work with an international consultant that really nails down where the biggest opportunities are, most Australian businesses are going to look at the UK, the US, Canada, depending on the industry, maybe Singapore, maybe the Southeast Asia region, maybe Japan and Korea, but the main ones are always the UK, Canada, US. That's what they look at. And yes, once, depending on the nature of the business, Mexico is always on the cards. So without going on that direction, I'm going off topic. I'm helping an Australian company now growing the business all over South America, but the main market was Mexico. From Mexico, we started saying, okay, what about the rest? But Mexico was the big one. So I guess trying to give you even more information, probably the main, also from a cultural point of view, and maybe somebody completely disagrees with me, and I apologize, Australians are usually going to be a lot more direct than South Americans. And that could create some misunderstandings where South Americans say, yes, I might be interested. And the Australians think that they've in the 3rd base, and they're not 3rd base, they're 1st base yet. They still have to build a lot. But I think, again, same as with Europe, there's only free trade agreements with a couple of countries, if you remember, so Peru, Chile, and stuff like that. There's a huge potential there too. So There's also a lot to explore.
So one last question. So before we wrap it up, so so if this is a small company, so that actually got inspired with your presentation, say, okay, let it be my trampoline. So where should I start? So what should I do like as a first step? Yeah.
I guess, and obviously, the easiest thing is to get in contact with you or with me to look into Australia. But I guess the very beginning, there has to be some research. There has to be some either assisted or by themselves some research. And usually that's the first question. Do you have the resources internally or externally to export it to Australia? What are they? What's their strength? What is the product? How does it look into? How does it look into the market in Australia? Is there potential? And then slowly but surely, I would probably recommend a lot more to talk with you or with me than to say, let's get a booth in a fair, pack up, spend 1 week there and come back. I think before anybody thinks about that, there is matchmaking services that most chambers of commerce can help with, or you or me. There is market research that we can help you with. There can be an effort of, I didn't mention matchmaking again, so just to make it clear, a list of 10 potential partners, companies that they can have meetings with. Those meetings can be online at the very beginning or can be in person, but there's a lot to look into. Even though there's no free trade agreement between Europe and Australia, there's a lot of ways to avoid the just 5% tariff to get into Australia. So if any European company can defend that the products are not being, all the services, services is easier, but the products are not being manufactured in Australia, there's a lot of ways to get rid of that 5%. What I would also say, because, and you probably have seen that in many other markets, it's better to start in Australia slowly, and depending on the product, maybe bring, I don't know, every product is different, obviously, but maybe instead of whatever we're thinking, a 40-foot container, bring 2 pallets at the very beginning, bring 3 pallets. Food is tricky, bring a little bit, see what really happens when it goes through customs, even though you've ticked all the boxes, and get into the market. But look, there's a lot of options to get help to get into Australia. I would recommend to use that help and commit and think it's not going to be a 6 months project. It's going to be a couple of months, couple of years project. But it's a project
that's a great
in a lot of different ways. But it's not like, we tried for 3 months and it didn't work. I mean, and I suppose all over Europe is the same. But one of my key partners, they are in the supermarket channel. Back in October, I was doing the presentations for next winter, and to be on those meetings back in October, you had to be in contact with them back in July. So no matter how fast you go, depending on your market, it's going to take a lot of time. Then you have to add, depending where you ship from, but we already mentioned it, from 2 months in Europe to 2 months in China. So patience is key. That commitment to 2-3 years, it's key. That commitment to having somebody on the ground as a consultant, as a part-time employee, as a full-time employee, I think that's a must. If not, and there's many different flexible options, and it doesn't have to be a headcount in a local office, but you need somebody here. You need somebody that they can go to and they can say, I'm not happy, or I'm happy, or where is this, or where is that? It's not in the 80s that everyone was used to operate. Now everyone expects somebody to be here and customer service to be here. So hopefully I've answered your question.
Okay. Yes, you did it. And I was not even expecting that, so they would cover so many aspects of this market, and we will see it from the completely different perspectives. and so on, and even culture. So it's known to be a difficult market, even because of culture. Even Americans make these mistakes, like comparing these two countries from cultural point of view. I think probably Starbucks in Australia is one of the most famous international business videos online. So that's obvious that there's.
But I would even, if we have a couple of minutes, I would also flip it and say some of the big companies look at Australia as a trampoline to get into the US. So, for example, the car company Cupra, which is part of the Volkswagen group, they came to Australia 3 years ago. In the opening of their first car showroom, they already mentioned, if Australia works, we'll go to the US.
It's a Spanish company.
Mac Cafe. So Mac Cafe, which is McDonald's, which is American, but Mac Cafe, the first Mac Cafes started in Australia. And when they saw that was growing, they moved into many other markets, right? So yes, some multinationals have come to Australia and didn't do very well, but vice versa has also worked. Some multinationals, again, saw something that the Australian market was doing very well, and they said, we could expand that into other markets, or we could look into Australia to see if that market that has some similarities with the US, it's a good experiment to get into the US. So again, it can be demanding, but I think the outcomes can be so positive for any business that it's worth looking into it. It's not going to work for everyone like anything, but it's worth looking into it with the help of some external experts.
Okay, so amazing. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time, for your expertise, and all this information. This information will stay online, and everyone who is interested in this market can actually see this presentation, learn from these case studies, from everything we just discussed, and try to use Australia as a trampoline, So I wish you the best luck with your deals now. I think you're in Spain. So
thank you.
With all your projects, we stay connected, of course. And so see you next time. So thanks a lot again for all.
Thank you very much,
Alex.
Thank you.
And being with us today. Okay. Everyone, so I forgot to ask, but maybe someone has a question, so we're still here. If not, probably see you next time. So next time we will organize some webinar about some other interesting market, or maybe this will be also about some technology applicable in international business. So in any case, so we will see each other soon again. If you are interested to know more about Manatex, its services, its mission, so you can visit our website and learn more. So we also constantly post something on our website about different markets, about different trends, technologies, etc., etc. So thank you so much for everyone who was with us today.